that still leaves probably about $1 billion, $1.2 billion that could be allocated. And as the Senator mentioned, transportation and taxes are two areas that kind of were left uncompleted last year, so I would guess they're going to be contenders. We'll also talk about a bonding bill and some other things. So anyway, so just to give you a little sense of what we're keeping our eye on, always try to watch carefully those forecast numbers because they give you a lot of great information. It's not just the revenues and the expenditures that the state's doing, but we also look at, they do very broad and deep analysis of how GDP is doing nationally and in the state. They look at international things that may be impacting sort of our economy, and then they come up with these predictions on where we may be in the next few years. So just with a little preface on that, I think we'll just go ahead and open it up for questions.
Yeah. Sure.
How much money roughly would it take to fix our roads and bridges statewide? Do you have estimates for that roughly?
You know, there are estimates, and honestly, that's been one of the things that has been kind of back and forth in the debate on the transportation bill. There was some discussion on, you know, how many billions of dollars it would take to really bring our infrastructure up to where it should be in terms of repairs, and then looking at if we need to expand capacity in various areas. And that's been a bit of a back and forth debate. I will say that the House transportation bill would put about $10 billion into roads and bridges. You know, there's some discussion that, and I think the governor or maybe the commissioner of transportation was saying, you know, we actually need $6 billion more than that. I think the important thing is that we need to address our infrastructure. We have bridges and roads that are crumbling. We have, in my opinion, a very inadequate capacity in the metro area and on some important corridors of commerce that we need to address. And we need to make a start and get a transportation package.
And the gas tax we pay now, isn't that supposed to go toward that?
Yes, and it does.
And it hasn't been going that direction, it's been going somewhere else, like light rail and so forth, or am I wrong?
No.
No, it does go to the highway fund. And, so that the gas tax dollars are dedicated to that. There are other dollars that end up being used on light rail and other kinds of projects, but you know, the gas tax does go for the bridges.
Say the gas tax is fully dedicated?
I believe it is, yes.
I thought a portion of it goes to the general fund.
No.
No.
No. No, it's all reserved in the highway trust fund.
Yeah, my understanding is that the Southwest Light Rail line needs approval from the legislature for a certain amount of funding before federal dollars are available and the project can move ahead. Could you give us an idea of what the prevailing sentiment is with the legislature in the coming session on that?
Well, and this, you're right, this project has been out there for a while. I think the federal government requires a certain percentage of the project to be funded through local participation, which typically has meant that the legislature has to come up with some money. I think it's about $240 million or something like that. I don't know the exact number. And it hasn't been approved. And that number has been out there for some time. I think my sense is that in the legislature there's not a lot of appetite to do it on either side. A couple of years ago when the Democrats were in the majority in both the House and the Senate, they didn't do it, and the House majority this last year didn't do it. And I think the real sticking point is that there's a significant amount of money that comes out of the general fund. And people in greater Minnesota are looking at using those monies to do transportation projects in greater Minnesota, and they're not sure, at least they are not persuaded that spending the money here is an advantage. So I think that has been kind of a hang-up. It's sort of been, at least in my judgment, a kind of a bipartisan reluctance to spend that money. And I don't know what'll happen this year, whether there's going to be a big push to do it or not.
So it may not happen.
I guess it's possible. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a possibility, certainly, and I would say a pretty strong possibility from the House side. The requirement is if you get federal approval for your project, project, is that half the money comes from the federal government and half has to come from state and local funding. Now, when the Metropolitan Council put together their project plans for Southwest Light Rail, they wanted 10% to come from the state. It doesn't have to, it can come from other sources. That's just where Met Council has decided they wanted that funds to come, and I actually think it's about 125 million that they're looking for. But, you know, the governor put forward his bonding bill proposal, his list of projects. Southwest Light Rail was not in it. And as you might know, there's been a group of citizens in Minneapolis along the Kenilworth Parkway area that have filed a lawsuit. They did sort of get the first legs, or they were seeking some email communications and other things from Met Council on the project, and the judge said that they could have access to that communication. So I do think this project is going to be ensnarled in continuing litigation and that, and I don't know if that's the reason that the governor didn't include it in his bonding proposal or not, but I do think that there are some problems and concerns with the project right now. But that being said, you know, Met Council could decide that they're gonna use their MVEST money, CTIP and the other sources if they wanted to go through and do it that way as opposed to relying on the state. That's just been their project plan at this point. And I think they're gonna probably hit some resistance from the legislature on that.
As far as the gas tax, Minnesota should not go much higher than any of the neighboring states, because 10 years ago, when Minnesota was 8 cents cheaper than on the gas tax in Wisconsin. My father was cheap, would drive 8 miles round trip to fill up in Minnesota, and anybody living in Wisconsin would top off before leaving Minnesota. And that had hurt the businesses at the border.
I think in this whole transportation debate, there has been a proposal to increase the gas tax. It's a little different proposal than currently. The current gas tax is a certain amount per gallon, regardless of the price of the fuel. The new proposal is a tax on the cost at the wholesale level, so as the cost went up, the tax would go up. And I think the proposal the governor had would have added, in effect, about another 16.5 cents per gallon at the pump on the gas tax. But I'm not sure. There doesn't seem to be a lot of appetite to push that. The governor made a statement earlier, right after the forecast, where he pretty much said he was done trying to push that. So we'll see. A lot of things that could happen.
Yeah, it's been very unpopular across the state right now, the prospect of raising the gas tax when we have a significant budget surplus in that. So I think the governor, once seeing the forecast, basically backed off of that. And so I believe that the negotiations now in the transportation bill will not include plans to do any kind of increase in the gas tax at this time.
And that's even though we did 10 billion, or give or take 5 billion for roads and bridges, right? So we want the roads and bridges, the transportation, but we don't want to pay for it.
I think the House did pass, and there was support in the Senate for a plan to spend $10 billion. It relied on other monies than a gas tax. What it really was saying is we collect taxes right now on a lot of things, many of them related to automotive items. And to dedicate those taxes we are currently collecting and not put them in the general fund, but put them in the transportation fund. In the course of doing that, you get a significant amount of money dedicated to those.
Yeah, so the House plan would be, in round numbers, about $400 million that are currently just going into the general fund that would now be separated and put into the trust fund and not spent on anything other than transportation needs. And that would be sales taxes on auto parts, tires. Also, if you rent a car in Minnesota, there's a pretty significant tax on that. Those would all be segregated, not going into the general fund, but being dedicated towards roads and bridges for a transportation plan.
So if we're reducing money that's in the general fund, what are we reducing in expenses in the general fund?
Well, and that's where the debate comes in. Right now, we've got a surplus, so we're able to do it. I think the important thing will be going forward. This is a discussion I've had often at these town hall meetings. We have to keep a close eye on Minnesota's economy and what our percentage of growth is on a year-to-year basis, and not spend over that rate of growth. And that has been the case in Minnesota for a number of years. Now, we haven't had double-digit increases in our GDP or our economic growth for many years. And in fact, you know, in 2008, right before I came into office, we had been through one of the worst economic recessions in this country since the Great Depression. So we spent a lot of time trying to, you know, recapture lost jobs and lost income and people's personal earnings in that. And so, you know, depending on how the figures are coming in, I think the last figures I saw from a year's look in November of 2015 is that our rate of growth was somewhere around 2.3, 2.4%. So trying to keep your biennial budget or your annual increase in spending to that rate or below is important. I think we came pretty close to achieving that this year. The rate of growth in our budget was about 5%, 5.1%. The lowest increase in the state's biennial budget on a percentage basis, second lowest increase in 50 years of state budgeting. The biennium before it was a 12% increase, which is far beyond what our economy is doing. So, you know, I said it's, you know, a lot of these discussions are political at the legislature, but this is more of a math issue. You can't spend more than you're earning or your economy is growing.
But I understand that in order to have more to spend, we need our economy to grow. But nonetheless, in this picture, in this time frame, if we're diverting, and I'm not opposed to it, I'm just wondering if we are diverting some money from the general funds to pay for our roads and bridges, which I want to put money there. I think probably most of the state is supportive of that. You know, that means we're taking funds away in the short term right now from somewhere else. So where are we deciding?
It's not necessarily taking money away from anything. It's a question of going forward, where do you make decisions on spending?
Okay, what will be less of a priority?
Well, I think
Make the gas
that's
more
what,
of a priority.
that's what the legislature would have to make. I think there's an article that was published in the St. Paul Pioneer Press about a week ago that talks about this very thing. And they point out that the demographers' reports that have been coming out say that for every one working age person entering the economy, there are 21 turning age 65.
Right.
That's the current demographic condition that we live in. If you build a large and growing state expense structure that needs to be maintained, it's a real question of how you generate the revenues when you have a shrinking working force.
So I'm
So
still
I think that
asking-
the challenge is for the legislature to say, what is more important? Taking additional money and adding it to a transportation project, or taking additional money and adding it to something else in the state budget? And that's
So
that's
then
what
my question would be, what's the difference between the Republicans and Democrats as far as if we all want to put more money into transportation, and let's say we all want to put more money into aging services, because I think everybody recognizes that need. What's the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats as far as what is going to become not less of a priority maybe personally, but when we're divvying out our budget, what's going to be relatively less important than it has been in the past compared to the aging and the transportation? Where are those differences?
So far, the main difference has been that the Democrats have said you need to have more taxes. And what we said is, no, we need to try to live with the taxes we have and try to set priorities. So that's been the debate.
So where would the priorities be? I'm not like differing, I'm just trying to figure out where we're
Well, I
at.
think that's what the legislative process is. You have bills, and for example, this thing we're talking about with transportation. If that is a priority, and you say we're going to take and dedicate some revenues to that, then we're acknowledging that going forward, that doesn't mean we're going to cut back any spending. It just means that there may not be as much to spend in other areas. And the question with the legislature is, which is a bigger priority? To do the thing for transportation or do what we do today?
So, I'm not getting any specifics yet on
Well,
where.
I can't answer for where the legislature will end up. I can tell you from my
I
perspective.
want to know where you will.
Okay.
that
That's what I want to know. What do you think?
I think it makes sense to dedicate money to do transportation projects at this point. We have neglected that. It's our general fund budget, we spend less than 1% on transportation.
I'm actually supportive of that, but I'm
Yeah,
just trying to
yeah.
think, what are the consequences that we're gonna, that will get resistance?
And, you know, you ask a good question, and I think the senator was saying, you know, well, there's 201 legislators, you may get 201 different ideas about where our priorities should be. So just, I mean, speaking for ourselves, and again, you know, the 400 million that we would wall off right now comes from a surplus, so it's not dedicated anywhere else. And moving forward, again, depending on how our economy transportation fund and not be available for other things. So that means as you look at your rate of growth or change in programs, you've got to make sure that, again, you're not growing any of our current programs faster than what we're spending. And then I would prioritize, and again, I'm current chair of the education committee, when I look at our demographics, the number of aging people that we have in our state and how that's growing faster, and we'll have more people over age 65 and retired by 2030 than we will have kids under the age of 18 and in school. What are we going to do to replace that future workforce that we're going to need? And we have the worst achievement gap of any state in the nation here in Minnesota. Children of color are not achieving academically and not being educated as well as their white peers in our schools, and that is absolutely disgraceful. So we've got to make sure that we're making better use of our dollars, that we're achieving results with the money that we put into these systems, and that we are successfully educating our children and getting them trained to be in the workforce. We cannot afford to have a group of people who are not successfully working, earning a living, being able to support their families in the state of Minnesota. Our economy just will not work unless we do that. And so that would be the priority that I would to look to as we're looking at our budget.
I have a question. I don't envy you guys with the big surplus. I'm sure you're getting everyone asking 10 times more than what the surplus is. But with the graying workforce or graying of Minnesota, we're one of the few states that actually tax Social Security benefits. And people make a choice. We already have a hard enough time keeping people here with our lovely winter weather. Is there any possibility of actually making a structural change so all of these people that are still, that are older than 65 can still stay here economically and pay taxes and you know, live here?
Yeah, and yes, and I would say the tax bill, there was a bill passed through the House that is in conference committee with the Senate, and major components of the House tax bill include a phase out over 5 years of the tax on Social Security benefits in Minnesota. We're one of 6 states that taxes Social Security. Only 6 do that. And it's something that I hear from frequently from constituents. The other is military pensions. We would also eliminate taxing those, again, where many states don't do that. We want to try to keep people who want to stay, and I hear this often. I'd like to stay here, my grandchildren are here, but the level of taxation in that is high. And we are a high tax state, and I think whatever we can do to encourage you to stay here, to not relocate. Maybe you've got someplace warm that you go in the winter, and we're kind of pushing people, in my opinion, to do that 6 months plus a day somewhere else and establish their residency, even though they would like to be in Minnesota. So those are 2 big components. We do other things too to try to help families. It's about a $2 billion tax bill, and included in that is that $400 million that we're walling off for the transportation bill. But we've also got about $1.3 billion of that is in reduction on sort of personal income taxes. So those 2 things I mentioned, an increased exemption for people. So we've got the federal exemption. We've not really recognized that in Minnesota. We're going to give you 25% of your personal deductions that you can recognize on your tax forms. If you're paying interest or debt on, or interest or principal on student loans, you can write some of that off of your taxes. We're going to encourage people to save for retirement, for long-term care, for college, through deductions on your taxes if you contribute to funds. So there's a lot in there to try to help families, working families with young children, the dependent care tax credit, and beefing that up a little bit if you've got daycare costs.
It seems like the IRS doesn't want the seniors to live in Minnesota. Because they say, you can't have your accountant here anymore. You can't have your doctor here anymore. Well, we're a service economy, and if they don't have those services here, we're going to be really hurting for all of this income tax that we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's
those
not the
policies
IRS,
are
it's
also
the
addressed.
Minnesota Department of Revenue.
Yes, and those policies are also addressed, and the other thing is that, we are known for high-quality healthcare. We've got Mayo and just, nation leading. If you are here in Minnesota for medical treatment, there's a provision in the bill that says that would not count towards your residency as well, because because we do have people who maybe have domiciled somewhere else, and they're coming here for some very specific medical treatment. And the Department of Revenue has tried to count that as you're a resident because you're here in the hospital. And that would no longer count as well. But again, this is proposal that's in conference committee between the House and the Senate, and will have to be worked out when we resume session.
Go ahead.
We'll alternate sides of the room.
Moving over to health and services, how much more money are we gonna dump into the not-so-sure MNsure program? And what are your positions on that?
Well, MNsure, of course, is the state insurance exchange that was created as a result of the federal change in the law. We've spent a lot of money putting that together. Most of that money has come from federal sources, which doesn't mean it isn't your money, it just means it doesn't come from the state budget. The law says that the structure has to be self-sustaining, meaning that it is funded, the operation of the exchange marketplace has to be, the funds have to be generated by activity on that marketplace. And that has not happened to this point because there haven't been enough people purchasing insurance on that exchange. So at this point, I think there are some questions going forward of how that's going to work. The law provided, when we passed the law, we said you could put a 1% up between the 1 and 3.5% tax on policies sold to finance the operation of the insurer. Almost immediately, we bumped it up to the highest end of that range of percentage, 3.5. It is still probably without, we're still getting grant money to pay for the operation of that, but it is not self-sustained. And I think that is one of the real challenges going forward. And we've had a task force of people looking at healthcare financing over the last several months. And they are getting close to concluding. I'm not sure what recommendations. I've seen some reports that say they might be talking about some things. But to me, personally, the real problem here is that because of the change in the federal law, there are very limited things that we can do in the legislature to affect how this works. That is a problem. We know there are problems. We know there are issues. There are a lot of people that have ideas on what we could do to improve those things. But the way things are right now, we are not able to enact those laws because of the federal law that prevents that.
Isn't there a committee that's researching whether we fix it or dump it?
That's part of this task force on financing, and one of the recommendations was to not dump it, but the choice is that you have a state-run exchange, which we have, we're one of the few states that do that, go to a federally operated exchange, or there's a third option, which is sort of a, I think, a kind of a blended version of that. There are costs to all those models, and my understanding is that this task force has not chosen to recommend to leave the state exchange, but I have not seen the recommendations. I don't think they've published them yet.
It's been a very frustrating experience for Minnesotans. You know, I'm sure you hear a lot from
Yep.
constituents. I've heard from people who tried to get through to MNsure, who can't reach a person on the phone, have tried to either sign up or correct problems with their coverage or their enrollment. It has not been customer service friendly. Some of those problems at the beginning have, you know, started to be resolved, but then just when you think it's getting better, you know, we'll get a new rash of contacts that it's just not. And there was, you know, a really disturbing letter to the editor in the Star Tribune recently about somebody's experience with Minnesota Care. And, you know, and that has really been, you know, been going away and pushing everybody into MNsure. You know, in the House, we put forward a number of things to try to help Minnesotans who need to get health insurance. Maybe they have an income level that qualifies for some of the assistance with purchasing premiums, where right now we force people to go through the MNsure process to access that. And it's just been problematic. So we've been trying to see if we could get some kind of a federal exemption or waiver that people could go to the marketplace, find their insurance, and then get the assistance with their premiums. So they would be able to go out and shop for their own insurance outside of MNsure, and then still get the assistance with their premiums that they'd be entitled to under the law. So we haven't
Just
gotten that.
increase the rates so the affordable health care is not being so affordable.
Yeah. Well, and that's a common story. I hear a lot, especially from people self-employed or small business owners, people purchasing their own insurance, and we're hearing of rate increases 30-40% is not uncommon from stories people are sharing with me. And again, it's really making health insurance unaffordable and healthcare unaffordable for many
The
people.
original projections for the MNsure exchange were that they need, I think, about 300,000 people to participate for it to break even. And at this point, there's less than 100,000 that are on that exchange.
Well, you can't do it if you can't get through. I mean,
It has gotten better from everything I can tell. I know they've been working at it. There's been improvements, clearly, but I think there's still questions going forward about whether this is the right structure to have. And for me personally, the biggest problem I have with this whole thing is that our hands are tied in terms of our ability to address problems that we see happening in our state. The only thing we can do, as Jennifer said, is we can say, well, let's try and do this and see if we can get a waiver from the federal government, which means that they would set aside the law and let us do something that is outside the current law. Well, that process, even if you're successful, could take years. This to me is a real problem. We've got a structure that is very, very cumbersome, and at the state level, there's very, very little we can do about it.
and yet the governor wants to have a committee to look at it.
That committee has been going on.
And you're saying we can't fight the federal government, so why look at it?
Well, they're gonna try to see if they can make some recommendations on improving it. That's all we can really do at this point.
And you mentioned it's federal funded.
No, the funding to get the thing started came
Oh.
from federal grant money. That's running out. Going forward, the operation has to be funded by activity that's generated on the exchange.
But it costs the state a lot of money. I had, one of my kids is in the program and he goes to the clinic and they don't have the equipment, so they send him to the hospital for x-rays and whatnot. And the people without transportation have to use state-funded transportation to go back and forth and carry their medical forms back to the clinic, and it's just a mess, and I know it's cost a lot of people money, not to mention frustration, and people are starting to drop out of it now. You're talking about getting more people in, well, they've had it. So, and of course, they gotta look at alternatives.
We'll alternate sides of the room.
Speaking of healthcare, I'm sure you're well aware that we have a shortage of doctors in our state and our country. I was wondering if you're also aware that we have a pool of experienced doctors living in our state who can't get into the system, can't practice medicine here because they can't get a residency position. So we have a shortage of residency positions here in our state. The group I'm talking about are international medical school graduates, and my wife happens to be one of them. And she is a surgeon oncologist and an oncologist. She works in the head and neck area. She has 10 years experience. Her last job was the lead surgeon of a head and neck department of a hospital rated in the top 10 in all of Europe. So we're trying to find a way to get her into the system, help alleviate some of these problems we have with the doctor shortage, people kind of get their appointments on time. And I'm wondering if you guys could lend your support to our cause and try and help fund residency positions in Minnesota. In the last omnibus spending bill, we managed to get $1 million for that, which is about 3 positions. But we're also trying to get an apprenticeship program started. For instance, a surgical residency takes 5 years. It's about $750,000 for 2 course period, and that usually comes from the federal government. But if we could do that in 1 year, for someone who's got that kind of experience, we could save $600,000 of taxpayer dollars, and we could get them in the system 4 years earlier, practicing medicine. I was wondering if you have any comments on that.
Well, I can just tell you that I was a chairman of the Health and Human Services Committee for a couple of years, and you're right, there are these problems, and there are problems with residency, there's problems with licensing, especially from people who have been trained outside of the United States. And I think these are ongoing issues. I can't answer your question specifically about where that is or what can be done, but I do think that generally there is concern and interest in trying to make this work more easily for people who have been trained in other places. And all I can tell you is that it's something that is going to be continued.
I'd have to look into it a little more, but it sounds very familiar to an issue I'm working on more directly, which is teacher shortages. And we've got the same thing going on in the state, and how do we get, because we have people who have been trained in other states, experienced, have demonstrated that they're very quality teachers and would be good candidates, but we're having a licensing problem in Minnesota where we're not able to get through and get people through through the process, we're not able to explain in a very understandable way what it takes to get your license if you've been trained in another state. And we need to make sure that we've got systems, whether you're talking about doctors, which are critical, teachers, which are critical, that we've got systems that are working to make sure that wherever you live in Minnesota, you've got quality access to education, to medical care, and things that we'd all want to have.
Hey, I don't know what teach.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. I don't serve on a healthcare committee, so I'm not as well versed in all the details of those provisions, but this sounds like a really important one, and I will absolutely take a look at it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Kevin Osmond, 4 Wheel Drive. We love our outdoors in Minnesota. I'm a sportsman, as many are here in the state, in this room. A couple of issues. One, bonding. Wildlife management areas, I believe, will be in the bonding bill. We know with the legacy fund, when that was passed, it was not supposed to supplant funding, and we've seen that happen over the last 6-7 years. So I hope you would consider offering some money for wildlife management areas in bonding bill. We also have the CREP easement program coming up. And with our water quality issues, I hope maybe you'll consider supporting the PrEP program. Be interested in seeing what you think about that. But then the last issue is the trapping. The DNR has been actually monitoring for the last 3 years these, what they call body grip traps. And we're not against trapping. I'm not, and the group I'm with, Sportsmen Take Action. But, and most hunters aren't. But the thing is, some of these traps are so big that a dog's entire head can get in a trap, and you can't release them. You have to have a special tool, or you have to have training how to take them off. And I was just wondering what you think about that bill, because for those that don't know this type of trap, it's a body grip trap. This is a very heavy foam decoy, goose decoy. This would be like the nose, and the way the traps clamp down is on the back of the neck, and it just squashes them right down to the spine. And we know it's not working. The past legislative matter is this little ledge on a little box. The dogs can still get in. And I'm just wondering, can you support the 2 bills that really would protect our dogs, Senate File 1325 in the Senate, and then House File 1655, if you would sign on to those bills, and maybe encourage your caucus members to do likewise. It's tragic. Another 7 dogs died this year. The DNR's documented over 40 dogs have been caught in the last 3 years since they've been monitoring this. And to have 7 dogs die, and that's not even including the other ones that aren't reported, where a lot of sportsmen don't want to be in the paper. They don't want the publicity. But, I mean, these are families being affected. And I know as a fact, I have friends that aren't hunting in Minnesota after mid-October. They're stopping their grouse hunting because that's when the traps come out. And I think it's just sad that we have to be afraid to be in our outdoors. And I'd just like to have your input, especially on the trapping bills, and then maybe also on that bonding and the PrEP program.
Well, just the trapping bill, that issue I know has been something in the legislature for the past probably 3 or 4 sessions. I can recall there's been debates about this. And I know there was something that was passed a couple of years ago, I think you referred to it, that was a compromise. And as you probably know, but for others, the issue is that there are people who make their living trapping. And they are trying to go out and set traps. It's primarily people in northern Minnesota or some of the more remote areas, and they're out there trapping, and they're trying to make a living, and they have an interest. And there are other people that, many of us who live close by or have dogs, that we see these things happen, as you say, when animals get caught in these traps, you shouldn't be caught in traps. So there is an effort to try to work out something that would be acceptable to both groups. I don't know what the status of that is. We had a bill, it got to the floor, it did not get voted on. This was a bill in the Senate that was, all the authors are DFL, the DFL majority, so for whatever reason, they did not want to take it up and try to vote on it. And so at the end of session, it got returned to the Judiciary Committee where it last came from. And I'm not sure what is going to happen on this bill this year. This is part of the same biennium, so you don't need a new bill. This bill will still be active. But I just don't know. I don't know what the hang-up is. I don't know what the objection is. I'm not sure what the details are. So I can't answer the question because I don't know a lot about it. So.
I'm here. I know it very well.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate you bringing that issue forward, Kevin, and I have heard from a number of constituents about it. It is an issue that I am concerned about as a dog owner, and that, so I will take a very close look at the bill. I don't know what its prospects are in the House. I'd have to, again, look at the specifics of it. I looked at it last year when we were in session, so I'll take a fresh look at it again and see. And I'll talk to the chair of the committee and just find out if they've got any plans to move it.
Couple couple of comments. On the healthcare costs, I totally get what you're talking about, but as my husband was a business owner, and the healthcare costs were going up astronomically every year, even before the Affordable Care Act. And so the costs are really an issue. But about the conibear traps, there's another bill about snaring. 21 other states have gotten rid of snaring. Snares are just invisible wire loops. Sometimes they're power snared. So there are a lot of dogs that are injured by snares. Moose, deer, pheasants, and grouse killed by these snares. And we're having this new walk-in wildlife management area program, increasing funding for pheasants and becoming a, restoring habitat for pheasants. But yet we have these landmines for pheasants and for wolves and for dogs and for all the other wildlife links, but especially pheasants, because they walk, they're ground birds and fly very low. So there is a bill about snaring, removing wildlife snaring, which would, in addition to the conibear traps, would make the woods a lot safer and still not eliminate all trapping. And we could be the 22nd state to just get rid of the snaring, because it's very, very indiscriminate. No targeting at all.
One idea there is we have zones for hunting, with high power rifles and shotguns and bow and arrow. Why can't we have zones for trapping?
I'm sure we do, but to be honest with you, people put hundreds and hundreds of snares out, and it's very hard to enforce. I mean, you can have all the rules you want, all the zones, and you can say, here you can have, here you can't, but the amount of DNR personnel we have, so.
Well, that's what you're really talking about, is policing them.
Well, it's very hard. Anyway, the snares injures a lot of dogs. I don't know if you saw that one dog with her.
And that is a separate bill from
Right.
the one that Kevin
Right.
mentioned.
Okay.
So I can't remember which side was that. That side? Okay.
I'm a school bus driver, and so, education is.
Thank you.
But, you mentioned the importance of people of color getting a full-time education, and I drive a busload of Somali kids that run my routes, and they're very smart, and they're very energetic, and I don't feel they're getting something that they need, and I'm wondering if you could specifically address the Somali population and how we're integrating them, because it seems like there's such a divide. I see them 10 minutes a day, and there's very little I can do. They're very smart. They're wonderful. But sometimes it's tough, And I'm concerned about that. I'd like to see them get a fair shot like every other person in there.
Well, and I think in Prairie, we have a very large population, as you know, of Somali kids. And we're not the only place in the state. Minnesota has one of the largest populations of any state in the country. So this is not an issue that is just unique to.
No, not at all. I'm looking for specifics of how we address that issue.
Well, and I think every individual school district is trying to do as much as they can to figure out how to address these problems. And there have been problems. I know for a school board, I served on the board a number of years ago, but these are issues where every school board is trying to figure out what can we do to reduce this achievement gap that has been persistent for decades. And at the state level, we can pass funding bills and we can do that, but how the education is delivered at the local level, I think there are a lot of things that I think many districts are trying to figure out. How do we do this? How do we get this through? Every new immigrant population that has come to our country has faced the same kinds of challenges, and it usually takes a little while to figure out what do we have to do to make the connection, to make sure that everybody has that opportunity.
Have we, as a state, have we passed a successful strategy of one that was works here, that we pass that on to anybody, or is it just everybody's representing themselves and try to figure something out for themselves?
I don't think anybody has figured out what is the thing that works that is going to solve this gap. As I said, it's been, for as long as I've been in the legislature, we've talked about this, and every year we have passed legislation that is, at least we say we're trying to address this problem in the legislation. But I think fundamentally it comes down to empowering local school districts, local teachers, administrators, working with parents to figure out what kind of things need to be done to make sure the kids, their kids, learn to read, learn to write, and are successful. And I'm not sure it's a question of devising some kind of a program as much as giving people an opportunity to try to have some flexibility in how they're going to try to make this work. It's a huge challenge.
I spend a great deal of time on this, and during the interim between session, I meet with a lot of people with their programs, touring schools, and that. So I'll just give you a couple of observations and that I take away from this. One is that if you're going to successfully educate children, it starts with building leadership, and that means strong principals. I can tell you immediately if I walk into a school building, if there is a principal there that is encouraging an environment of learning, of respectful behavior, you know, by seeing what's going on in the hallways, things in the classrooms. And we had a problem with not having adequate training for our principals and really helping them to understand that, you know, we've got a much more diverse student population in most of our schools than existed, you know, 10, 20 years ago, and how they can help educate learners that come from different cultures, from different backgrounds, and how they can make sure that each child is successful. And so one of the things that we put into our education bill was more money for principal training, where those programs are specifically shown to help principals be successful in measuring how students are doing, or how are they doing in their academic outcomes, because, you know, at the end of the day, that's what I want to look at. There's a lot of great ideas out there, but if you're not getting results at the end of it, you're just throwing money out the door and you're not getting anything for it. So that's important. The second is we've got programs, something called extended time revenue. So summer school, after school programs and that, we provide funding to schools to do that. I want to make sure that schools are taking advantage of that and developing programs that work well. I toured a nonprofit, you know, largely volunteer program aimed at, it's run by Somalis, individuals, and to help Somali children both to be academically successful, to make sure that they're, you know, focused on their studies and focused on, you know, getting their education and being, you know, productive members of society. They meet after school in a building here at Eden Prairie, and they said, well, our parents, they've got money through University of Minnesota Agriculture Extension, so really a 4-H program, and they're doing science experiments with the kids and that, which is terrific. But the director of the program said, you know, a lot of the Somali parents would really just prefer a tutoring program that helps the kids with their homework after school. Because remember, you've got a culture where maybe a lot of the children grew up speaking English or learning English, but their parents don't. And their parents maybe weren't educated or had any formal schooling or much of it. And so a lot of these parents are not able to help their children with their homework. And so my next step is to go and meet with schools in our district and say, you know, could we have space? Could they have space for an after-school program so maybe the kids could stay after school? They're providing tutoring and that to help the children, you know, get help with their homework that they need, and that to stay on top of their coursework in their classrooms. So, you know, sometimes it's a big thing like a state program. Sometimes it's smaller things like just saying, you know, there's a group of volunteers that want to come in and do tutoring for these kids. Can they have space in the school after school to do that? And, you know, so it's a combination of those things, but just to make sure that we are all dedicated towards making sure that every one of our kids gets the opportunity to succeed. A lot of it's going to come from parents and families, making sure that their kids are, you know, doing the work and things that they need to in school. But it's also having schools that are responsive to the various needs of our children.
I'd like to respond to that because I have a unique viewpoint. I teach in higher ed, but I also sub in K-12. So I've been in the classroom in all these areas, and I think there's 3 things that you could bring up with education where you can focus those dollars on areas that might help. This is just my viewpoint, but I think it's important to mention. First of all, teachers need to have their respect and authority back. It doesn't seem like in any of the classrooms that I've been in that the teachers is the authority. That's been taken away. And then secondly, I think that the desk arrangement is more like a play area than it is an educational area. So when I went to school, we had desks in a row and everybody had their own space to think and work. And I think we're mixing this up with a play area. We're putting 6 tables together with 6 students that are inevitably, a couple of those will be into school, as students come into higher education, they take a placement test, and that places them, this is their level of learning. So if we could put students in the right level right at the beginning, and then follow that through and put the dollars there, instead of all this extra supplemental learning and tutoring, I feel like that might be a solution, or a couple of solutions to the problem.
You know, you raised some really good points, and one of the things I've observed is that compared to how things were when I went to school many years ago, and how our kids are educated are very, very different. I think education is largely more demanding. The subject area in that is much more complex. There's much more technology integrated in everything because that is the world in which we live and we work. And educational models are changing. It's becoming different. Now, you know, in terms of the desk configuration and room setup, you know, I'm going to assume that was the choice of individual teachers. And I know there's an emphasis on having children spend time working in teams or in groups on projects and various things, and it's part of fostering an ability to work together in a group on a project and that, which there's some important learning that goes on there. But I would agree that a teacher needs to be in command of their classroom, absolutely. And that's, again, gets to my point about having a really good leader and the principal of your building, and cultivating an atmosphere of respect, of respectful behavior and learning. You know, I've been really impressed by a lot of the schools that I visited and how much that one of the things that they incorporate every day, I think it was Cedar Ridge Elementary was one of the last ones I visited in Eden Prairie where they talked about this. They have you know, things about what it's like to be basically a good citizen and character development and what those things are. I thought it was a great story in the news recently. You know, we all watched the big game, and unfortunately our kicker missed the last important field goal. But you know, the first grade teacher that brought that lesson into the classroom, because one of their character traits they were working on was empathy, and to say, can you imagine how terrible, you know, he feels, and maybe we should all write a letter to them. And that's going on in all of our schools, talking about the importance of perseverance and, you know, empathy and respect for others. Those kind of things are going on in schools now. Maybe they're not going on all at the same level, but you know, insisting on certain type of behavior from students and following through with consequences is an important part of learning for all of our kids. And that needs to be something that exists. Even if we're going to change educational models, and maybe we're going to spend more time with our, you know, desk grouped or something, you know, that can't be lost. So I think, you know, you raise some important points, but, you know, again, I'm finding that education is evolving. And so maybe we won't have kids, you know, if you're 6 years old, you're in kindergarten or first grade anymore, we'll look at what your abilities are, and you may have kids of various age in a classroom, and you graduate and you have mastered a certain attainment level in key areas, whether it's, you know, mathematics and reading or literature, those kind of important things. And that I could very well see that being a model that we're going to. Because again, the important thing is that kids reach an age where they are competent in core things that we know they need to do before they go on to that next level of learning or training or career readiness.
Over here. Go ahead.
Soft question here. I was just curious, we're about a month and 1 week away from our caucuses. And I was just curious, since this is a presidential election, who you plan on supporting at this time? And I want to be real easy, and why?
Well, I can answer that pretty easily because I'm co-chair of the Minnesota Carly Fiorina for President campaign. So I'm publicly out as a supporter for Carly Fiorina. And obviously she's not doing that well in the polls for anybody who cares about these things. But I don't know what's going to happen in the presidential contest. But that's, a number of months ago, in watching her, I just thought that she was a very unique person. I thought she could very effectively communicate. And so I just said, well, I'm going to try to help her. So that's what I'm doing.
And I have not picked a favorite. I'm watching with interest, but not picked a favorite, not declared a favorite. Still studying.
hunting and fishing is a large part of our economy, but the youth aren't getting into it. Last year, Florida tried an experiment where from November 15th to the end of December, they cut their lifetime licenses in half in hopes of getting the grandparents to buy the grandkids. Because as a young suburban adult, maybe twice a summer you might want to go fishing. Do you really want to spend that money? Where if you have a license in your pocket, burning a hole in your pocket, you're more likely to go. Something like that should be looked into.
I think there have been some efforts to do that. I remember a couple of years ago, we had a bill that was trying to make those lifetime licenses a little more accessible to more people. But you're right, there's a concern generally. The number of people who go out hunting every year or various other outdoor sporting activities does seem to be a little bit in decline. And there are a lot of groups I know that are trying to generate interest by young kids in particular to go out and do this stuff. So
And we've tried to keep the licenses for people less than 18 pretty low
Pretty
to
low.
encourage people to do that. Back this way.
I'd like to talk briefly about the legacy fund. Is there a governmental entity that audits that fund, and do they have policing powers? I heard an unsubstantiated allegation that that there was a guest speaker visiting at some seminar and they gave him $40,000. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but.
I've not heard that. I don't know the details of that, but generally we have an auditor that is charged with making sure that public monies are spent appropriately. I don't know if there's been an audit of legacy process. I do know that we have a legislative committee that is House and Senate, Republican, Democrat, pretty broad-based, that is charged with making decisions on where that money gets spent. But you're right, anytime you're talking about spending a large amount of public money, there needs to be a function to make sure that that money does get spent the way it is appropriated. And your particular question, I've not heard that particular story, and I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I've not heard that either.
On a segue to that, I'm from California, we had the sundown law. And when bills were completed, they took them off the books. In the state of Minnesota, I know several bills that have been defunct, getting hundreds of thousands of dollars to manage them, and there's no function to them. What are we doing to get those bills off the books?
Well, this gets to I don't know if you're talking about bills or programs. Programs, yeah. You know, this is something that I think we could do a much better job of in Minnesota, and that is, you know, for every program, there ought to be a list of, you know, what is it you're trying to accomplish? What are your benchmarks to know that you're achieving success? That every program should be measured at, and a time frame. And if you're not reaching the benchmarks in that time frame, then you either got to make adjustments or eliminate the program.
Perfect.
We had a sunset commission, and that was something that was enacted in the 2011-12 legislature. And obviously there was a party change control in the next election, and that sunset commission was eliminated. So unfortunately, we had a process in place to try to, every program was on a set pace for review in a staggered way every so many years. It's worked successfully in some other states. It's unfortunate. You know, maybe we'll try to make another run at putting something in place there. But again, and we do have a lot of programs that have been in place for years. One quick example of something, because it impacts Eden Prairie, something called fiscal disparities. And this, I won't bore you with the details, this is kind of a boring tax program. But what it means basically is that every commercial and industrial property in the 7-county metro area pays a separate sales tax that goes into a pool. It's administered by Anoka County. And then there's an average tax capacity number that's come up with for the entire metro area. And if your community is below the tax capacity average, you get money from that fund. And so what it means is there are winners and losers in the metro area. And so Eden Prairie is the #2 donor city. We have,
Which means we're a loser.
It's over $10 million of taxes that are collected from businesses in our community that go and they buy down the property taxes of residential and CI, commercial industrial properties, in other parts of the 7-county metro.
Well, it's Santa Claus Fund, right?
This program was created, the law was passed in 1972, there was some legal wrangling over it. So it started functioning in 1975, and has never been reformed, has never been changed. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know of much of anything in our communities and our society that is the same as it was in 1975. And this program is very unique. I asked our tax staff, I was successful in getting an analysis or study of the program done. I was hoping to get some suggestions from an independent audit firm that was looking at it for how we could change it or fix it. I'd like to actually see it eliminated, but you know, there's not much that goes unchanged there, and there's really nothing like it to compare to anywhere else in the country. This is unique. And so anyway, that's just one example of things that, you know, you can't just create these programs, put them out there on autopilot and never look at them.
And Jennifer really has been probably in the legislature the leading proponent of reform of this project. She is, I think everybody thinks of her as the expert on fiscal disparities, which is kind of a wonky thing, but it is a problem, it is an issue, it does need to be looked at, and she's done really a great job of trying to bring some focus to that. But another part of that question, though, is we have a lot of regulations that we enact, and I think that's another area in terms of reform. And there are people who said, well, maybe these regulations that are enacted by the departments should come back to the legislature periodically and either get approved or gotten rid of. There's a lot of stuff. Regulations have the power of law, but they're not enacted by the state legislature. They're enacted by departments after we've given them general authority. So that's another area of reform that probably we need to look at.
I'd like to ask a question about pre-K education. It was on the governor's agenda last session, and of course it went nowhere. And I'm somewhat familiar with it. I'm somewhat familiar that most of the families I know, their kids had pre-K education. They're affluent, and their children are unlikely to be in the group that has the disparity between demographic groups. What are your opinions regarding the possibility that pre-K be included in the educational system in Minnesota, throughout the state, for all children, instead of just white kids, as it mostly is, or at least not necessarily white kids, affluent kids. They go, and then the other kids, they might just be home and not really getting much of any kind of preparation.
Yeah, well, this was a topic that consumed a great deal of debate, discussion. We actually, the education bill that was produced during regular session actually was vetoed by the governor. We went into special session to resolve it, and that was one of the big sticking points. The governor has put forward a proposal and is behind the idea of what he's calling universal preschool or pre-K, and so that every public school would have basically a grade 4-year-old. I'm not in favor of that approach, and I'll tell you why. One, it's very, very expensive to try to implement from a standpoint of per pupil. But we've also got classroom space issues across the state, and you know, most of those funding, if you're going to have to increase your building space and capacity, that money comes from local taxpayers through bond referendums to do building and that. So those costs wouldn't all be borne just by the state. You know, I am a strong proponent of early childhood education for those kids most at risk of falling into the achievement gap because they don't have good early learning experiences that help them to be successful. And I said it's things that most of us probably, you know, if you have children, did with your kids. It's reading to them, you know, talking to them, singing with them, you know, all those things that help your children develop a rich vocabulary, a curiosity about learning about your colors and numbers, all those things. But some kids just aren't getting those opportunities. And maybe they have parents that have to work full time. They've got to be in a setting outside of their parents' care during the day. And are they getting those quality early learning experiences as part of their care? So I have been a proponent of scholarships to help those very poor families to be able to afford that type of quality care. Parents should have a choice about where their children are going to be, as long as it's a program of quality that offers those things that we want children to be learning and helping them to develop. So, but not everybody's gonna need it. My kids went to preschool, but we did that because we wanted to and our family could afford it. So, you know, we have a state of limited resources like most people and most families. And so I think the effort should rightly be on children most at risk. And that's where we focus it, and we do it through a scholarship program. And that's how we ended up resolving the impasse with the governor. And, you know, in discussions with the governor, I don't think our goals are terribly different. We want to see all children succeed. I just don't think his manner of wanting to do it is the best way forward. Because again, you may be creating a program that, you know, a lot of affluent families now would not have to pay for preschool that are currently doing it. But, you know, in the meantime, you may not be providing all the, you know, the help for those kids at risk. Because we've seen in other states that have done it, you end up having those middle and upper class families that are enrolling their kids in, and poorer families still are not getting their kids into the programs. So I think we've hit on a pathway that is the best for in terms of directing our resources to the kids who need it most. There was just a study out and looking at the scholarship program and how well it's working. We're going to continue to see if it's showing results in terms of helping kids. You know, we want to increase the number of kids who are reading well by the end of 3rd grade. That's a great indicator of whether or not you're going to go on to successfully graduate from high school. All of those benchmarks are things that we're following, again, to make sure that those monies that we're investing are showing results and helping all of our kids learn.
I think the governor's proposal, and he's talked about introducing it again, but I think one of the problems with the governor's proposal is that it is very costly. If you fully implement it, it's about $1 billion a year, and going back to the discussion of where we set priorities, that's a huge amount of money to say we're going to make a priority of that. And it really doesn't have the support that you would need to get that thing done. I was just last week at a meeting in the Hopkins School District. They had their legislative committee and the superintendent and the administrators and school board members, and they have recommendations on what they think the legislature ought to address. They do want to see us continue offering money for early childhood education through scholarships and through some targeted programs, because their focus again is on let's make sure we are reaching the kids that need it. They were not in favor of the governor's proposal. They saw that as using money that could be better used in other things. So I think that is really the sticking point with the governor's plan, is that it just doesn't have the kind of broad support. Even Art Rolnick, who's been a leading proponent of early childhood education, he has said this is not the most effective way to address the problems in early childhood. So I think that really is the point.
Well, you know, I think that what you're talking about as an approach, making sure the ones who need it the most get it, and then the well-to-do people do it anyway. That sounds like a prescription for so many other programs we've seen in this state and in this country, where the poor get something in terms of support, the rich get something in terms of support, and the people in the middle get nothing. And I think when it comes to education, we have to make sure all of our kids have access and are taking advantage of early education. And so whatever the number is in terms of dollars, I don't know. But I think the debate has to be, we need programs that ensure that all kids get into early education. To me, that's the point. And then I'll just segue to something completely different. back to post-secondary education. And I was on school board many years ago, and you know, there's this sense I've had for many years that our K-12 systems are kind of geared toward steering our kids to a 4-year college education. There's that great expectation that it's so hugely expensive, and so the average kid ends up with $50,000 in debt. The parents are in debt, and then you turn and you look at these schools, the technical schools, where you've got marvelous programs in giving people real skills, and a kid can go and inside of 2 years and maybe $20,000 can have a skill that'll set them up right out from the get-go, $40,000, $50,000 a year, no student debt. But you know, if for a K-12 school district to say, you know what, we're going to start steering kids toward trade school or technical school, that isn't going to go over real well. And so I think a role that the legislature, the state could play is establishing programs that encourage more families to look at this alternative, which also helps alleviate the critical shortage of skilled labor that we're faced with and we're gonna be faced with for many years. And so let's start re-engineering our school districts to position more of these kids to get a marketable skill and not a 4-year degree in English or history.
No, I agree with you, and Greg, I had the same concerns when I was on the school board and the legislature. I've talked and worked with Senator Stump, who's a Democrat, and was the previous chairman of the Education Committee. These are concerns that not all of us, but many of us share. I think you're right. I've in the last 2 years visited a lot of vocational education programs, if you will, or opportunities for kids. It is something that is not emphasized to the degree it probably needs to be. You're right, we spent a long time essentially sending the message that everybody needs to go to a college, and that's just not true. People can get wonderful skill training, they can leave and go right into a career that is very high paying, very much needed, and you're right, we have a shortage of those skills in this country. So I think that there does need to be a change in emphasis. And part of that is going to be efforts on the part of local school boards who say, we need to make sure that all our kids have the opportunity to have access to these things. Not all of our kids, even if they're very smart, want to go to college. My daughter was, I think, a very smart kid, did not want to go to college. So it's not a question of trying to force everybody into a channel, but to make sure there are opportunities for everybody to have these things. And we need to, you're right, we need to emphasize it more. I'm not sure what we can do at the state level to make that happen, other than encourage, maybe there might be some law that we could put in place that would serve that purpose, but I think we need to make sure the school districts are putting an emphasis on that kind of education as well.
Yeah, I think, we've had a transition where a lot of high schools had, pretty intensive vocational classes, and we've gone away from that. Now, I don't know whether it's realistic to try to bring those back into the high schools, maybe not. But when that money went away, and that money used to be sort of under control of the sort of the K-12 arena and went to the higher education, I do think where we've got PSEO, so post-secondary educational options, if you're in high school, you can take a class at a college and get college credit when you're in high school. Couldn't we create a similar program where the kids can go to the technical schools or community colleges in their area and gain similar experience while they're in high school, and help them identify areas, We've got a lot of kids who, I hear so much from employers, send me the kids, they don't have to go to college, but if they want to work with their hands, I can train them. I can train them to work in my manufacturing firm, and most of it's very high-tech anymore, and they need to learn a little bit about how to run computers and other things, because I can provide good jobs. So we need to make sure that we're exposing kids to that, that our counselors are prepared to offer direction to children, not just on how you get into a 4-year college, but also what other career opportunities are out there that you might want to explore if that's not a pathway that you're interested in going or pursuing. And there's a lot of ways that we can help bridge this gap, and it's something we are working on. Let's see.
Somebody we haven't heard from.
Okay, so we're back to the side of the room. Yeah.
Hey, so I would like to echo the sentiment previously shared around snaring. So obviously it is a very inhumane way to take animals, but I think what's important is it is very indiscriminate, and as previously mentioned, we see it injures and kills pheasants, eagles, and I appreciate and I want to thank you for your support and concern around snaring and pets, because there's quite a bit out in the news about how that impacts the families, as you shared, around trapping and dogs. So I know there are, I believe there's 2 bills, one in the Senate and one in the House, and that is in a committee. So my ask is that you continue to support those upcoming legislative session and take the appropriate measures that you can to help move those forward.
Yes?
Yes, we were talking about programs, but what's happening with the building over there? The Senate office building ever going to be finished?
I'll let you take that.
No, and besides that, there's that building going on, and then there's a restoration of the Capitol. Are they connected in any way? Are they 2 separate identities?
Well, they're 2 separate buildings, obviously, and there were 2 two separate financing instruments used to work on that. The capital renovation, much needed, broadly supported, Republicans, Democrats. We all thought that this is a building that is indeed repaired. It's a wonderful building, it's a historic building, but it really was kind of fallen down in some cases, and there were needs for improved electrical functioning and elevators and all kinds of stuff. So that was a very costly project, but broadly supported. It was done in a bonding. The other building, the office building that was built to house the Senate offices, was a little more controversial. It was not done as a bonding project. It was actually put in a tax bill, which has never been done before, highly unusual. The financing for it is not done through bonding. It's actually being paid for out of the general fund of the state government. It is completed. The Senate Democrats have moved in, and some of the nonpartisan staff has moved in. Our caucus has not moved in, and just to kind of repeat what we've said before publicly, we're trying to just do two things: save a little money and not cause any more disruption. We have a very short session next year. We're going to be there for maybe 10 weeks. There's always another move that takes place after a general election. There are people that don't run, and so there are new people that get elected, and majorities might change. So there's another huge move that goes on after an election. So our members, we talked about this, and we thought it just doesn't make sense to go through the disruption of moving to a new building so that we can be there for 10 weeks, and then at the end of the year, do another move. So we are just going to stay where we are for now, which is fine. It's perfectly adequate. It's just great for our purposes. Everybody knows where we are, all the constituents and our so we're just staying where we are. And after the election, then we'll move over to the new building. So I toured it back in midsummer before it was completed. I'm sure it'll be a great building and have a lot of room for constituents and other people to be there. But it's done. It's being used right now. And we're going to have the Senate session in that building because of the construction going on in the Capitol has made that Capitol session room not available for us. And so we are going to be using one of the big hearing rooms in the building as our session. So it's one of those things that has gotten a little controversial, but it's more of a practical question for us of what makes the most sense. And we think it also saves some money.
And the Capitol restoration is one of the reasons that we're starting so late. And so we still welcome people to come over, but just so you know, it's my understanding there really won't be any running water yet in the Capitol. I'm hoping maybe that'll make for shorter speeches on the House floor if there's no bathrooms or anything, I don't know. But anyway, we're all looking forward to having that completed.
I just have one thing to say. It's related to the education thing, and I'll make it brief. I'm a former teacher. My children, I've always lived in the middle class. My 4 children all went to preschool. We did not have lots of money. There are very good church preschools out there who charge not that much when you compare it to anything related to childcare or whatever. There is education for middle income and even lower. And I really do support the idea that parents really should still be the #1 deciders of where these little people go, at least until they get into kindergarten. My granddaughter now is in kindergarten. She goes all day. We've taken care of her since she was 6 weeks old. And so it's just very important that we do keep a really realistic perspective. It really is easy to get on the idea that people don't have money, and I am very much for giving money and scholarships to really low-income people to help these children, get the benefit of what they need so they can succeed in school, because it's really, really important. But they also need to give the parents tools, and I think we need to focus on parents with these children, getting the tools so that they can really be at a place themselves where they're going to be able to succeed themselves and also help the children in the way that they need to. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I know you had your hand up.
I've had a couple medical expenses recently that just totally baffle me. I went to the doctor in December complaining of a sore wrist, sore forearm, and was given a splint, one that you can buy at Walgreens, so on. It was a little bit higher quality. And it was billed out to my insurance company at over $100. The insurance company turns us and said, no, it's only worth 60 bucks. So I've been billed $60 for this. That same exact brand and model can be bought on Amazon, delivered to my door for under 20. Okay. I don't know how that happens. My wife recently was prescribed a CPAP machine, billed out by the supplier, the medical supplier, at $2,400. The same exact machine is available online from a number of vendors for $800. So how does this happen, and how do we deal with that? Because this seems like there's somebody making a heck of a lot of money in this process, and I'm paying the bill.
Well, I'll try to answer you. You're asking a pretty complicated question, I think, but I'll try to give you at least what I believe is the heart of the problem that you're getting at. And it's not unique just to that. It goes to a lot of things that we do medically. We have had for years, and this predates the ACA adoption, most of medical costs have been paid for by third-party payers, whether they're insurance companies or employers or some state or federal government health program. And when those things happen, you have to build administrative structures, and the long story is that things get more expensive. And consumers don't really care about it because we're not directly paying for it most of the time. And so you build a structure that has a lot of costs built into it, and those costs get paid for by third-party payers, and consumers, if you will, or patients or direct payers really don't know. I can tell you, when I was on chairman of the committee, I went around and talked to a lot of people. I go to hospitals, I go to doctors, I go to clinics, and I tell them, what does it cost to do an MRI? What does it cost to do a heart procedure? What does it cost to fix a broken leg? Nobody could tell me what the cost was. Now imagine this. If you go to anybody who makes anything, and you tell them, what does it cost to make your product, or what do you have to sell it for to make a profit, they can tell you that very precisely. But part of the problem that we've done over years is we've created a medical healthcare delivery system in which prices and costs are very, very difficult to get at. So I don't know the specifics about, in your case, what is going on there, but generally, that is a problem that I think needs to be addressed. It is not something that was addressed by the federal ACA legislation. That was primarily a structure that got at how do we pay those bills rather than why are those costs the way they are. That is still a fundamental problem that needs to be looked at. Why is it that things are so expensive? I've talked to people that have paid out of pocket for procedures, and they would go around and say, I need an MRI. They'd go here and they're going to be charged $2,500, and they'd go someplace else and it'd be $800. There's a wide variety of these things, the stories that get told. My hope is that as we go forward and continue to work on reform, that we get at things that make it easier for people to know what they're paying for. And they can ask themselves, is it worth doing it? I mean, if somebody told you you can buy this from your provider for 60 bucks, or you can order it on Amazon and it's your choice, what would you have done? You would order it on Amazon. Or who knows, maybe there's another supplier that you can buy from directly much cheaper. We've got to find ways to make those choices more available to more people and get at this issue of where these costs are. I can't answer specifically where you're talking.
No, I know you can't, but my wife was actually told by staff where this CPAP machine was supplied. They're making millions.
Maybe.
They're just cleaning house.
I don't know. I can't
So,
answer.
And there have been.
this has to contribute to the cost of medical
Yeah,
insurance.
And there have been attempts, and Minnesota's passed some laws to try to say that you've got to put that information out there so consumers can try to shop and say, well, if I know that I need something and, this doctor charges more than another doctor, but as the senator said, it gets complicated when you also have a health insurance that requires you stay in network and you've got to go to a specific doctor because of the arrangements they've made. So it's a continuing topic. But
We've been given the hook here that there's another group coming in here at 10:30, so we're going to have to. And again, our cards are on the table. If we did not get to your question, if you have more things you'd like to talk about, call us, send us an email. Thank you for.
Thanks for the meeting for both of you.
Thank you.